Thank you everyone for joining us. We will begin in about 1 minute. Welcome everyone to the Youth Mental Health and Disasters Resilience in and Through the Storm session of the Don Hampton Conference and Awards Ceremony. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. One thing of note, if you are interested in the participant section, you are able to edit your name. You have that capability, and we'd welcome that opportunity if you would like to edit your name to include the organization you are with, or perhaps the geographic area you are from, a county, a city, something along those lines. It helps all of our audience, our participants, be able to connect with each other a little bit better. We'd also remind you to please use your mute button when you are not speaking so we can have a nice, clear presentation. And also utilize the chat box throughout the session to ask questions, share information, make connections, really take advantage of our presenters today and the knowledge that they have, and don't be shy, share those questions. If you have any technical difficulties, you can reach out to Ashley Benedict. She is in here under the Zero.Tech Help, so that it will rise to the top. You should always be able to find that, and feel free to ask her any of the questions you have. She's our tech expert throughout the entire conference and will be in each of our sessions to be a support to you. Also, feel free to post the questions you may have in the chat box throughout the session, and if time allows, we will answer those as they come up. Otherwise, we'll take them at the end. And then just one last piece before we begin, I'll mention that the materials from the session will be made available after the conference, as well as a recording. We do intend to record this. I think we have started already, and so we'll be available to those after the session. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Mandy Gesme with COVID Recovery Iowa. She's the coordinator for Child and Family Services. And Paul Daniel, the Executive Director of Center Associates. We are so excited to have you with us. And with that, I will just hand it over to you, Mandy, to begin.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I'm Mandy Gesme, and I'm with COVID Recovery Iowa. And I just like to start it off with who all has heard of COVID Recovery Iowa. If you could just put yes or no in the chat, and then somebody could relay that to me so I kind of know. I'll explain as those come in what it is. So COVID Recovery Iowa came about once the pandemic was declared a disaster. And if you, I'm guessing you're familiar with those types of services that come about when something's being declared a disaster. But so unlike a tornado or a flood, the pandemic's been a little bit different, but also declared a disaster in a similar sense that the state then was able to apply for funds to provide some additional emotional services because of the disaster. So that's where COVID Recovery Iowa comes in. Other times it's maybe after a tornado or after a flood. You may have heard of Project Recovery Iowa, but we're providing services because of the derecho that was declared a disaster, and then also the pandemic. So how many people have heard of COVID Recovery Iowa that are on? What does it come through as? Lots of yeses or nos, whoever's monitoring the chat. I can't see it, so.
A healthy mix, I think. A few yeses, some nos.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. That gives me an idea. So what I'm going to talk about today, and then before I pass it on to Paul, is I'm just going to go through some of the things, some of the unique ways that we've provided services and outreach throughout the last year. One, to give you an idea of resources that are still available, but two, so that you know, in the event of another disaster, the potential for this type of service. So keep it in mind for that. So I'm going to talk to you about the impact that we've seen over the last year on teens, and so what we've been seeing, and then again some of the services that we're providing directly to youth, and then a reminder that it's a statewide project. So another part of this presentation is going to be that what I've been seeing. I live in tiny little Denver, Iowa, north of Waterloo, a very small little town, but it's a statewide project. So I really feel like I've done my best to kind of assess how the whole state has been dealing with this. And then I'm going to pass it off to Paul, who's going to talk more specifically about his community, what he's been seeing and their needs. So just to kick it off, like I said, I was involved in Project Recovery Iowa for some floods and tornadoes way back in 2007 that came through our counties. So I was a little bit familiar with how this whole process was going to go with the FEMA grant. But that's why I put all these different pictures in there, just so you know that that these services, once something's declared a disaster, does become an option for us. Again, it's for that additional emotional assistance that's often needed as a result of a disaster. So we're here for, we sometimes refer back to the community. If somebody calls us and they're like, you know, I need my therapist, mine's no longer available to deal with my depression and to have a med check, we're probably going to refer them back to something that's closest to their area. But we're more for that crisis counseling, but we do refer people back to existing resources too. So one of the things that we've been doing, and I thought it would be a good way to start it off, would be to have this little video play. So I'm going to play that here for you. But one of the things that we've done is we started a teen advocacy group. We were having a hard time connecting with teens throughout the pandemic. I know they're all on their devices, but I'm 43. How do I connect with teens that might need assistance? And so we started this teen advocacy group, and they have been really helpful, especially with what to put on things like Instagram. So here's one of our teens that helped us out in that teen advocacy group, and I have another one I'll play for you later, but these two teens said, yes, for sure, feel free to share our videos if it helps somebody else. So I'll go ahead and do that now.
Hi, I'm Zach. I really think COVID has affected me in a lot of ways. I think one of the biggest ways it's affected me is really in my social life. I really like being around people and being able to talk to people, but in a way, COVID's been like distancing to us, and I haven't been able to connect with people.
He hasn't been able to connect with people in the same way. So even though maybe he was doing in school in person for most of the year, which he was, he's wearing a mask and he's feeling like it's been distancing. Of course, a lot of activities canceled. So that's definitely one of the things that we've been seeing and feeling from our youth. It's distancing. You know, there's the 6 feet, there's the masks, but there's distance. They know there's worry. Worry has resulted in distance. So I already talked a little bit about this, but again, COVID Recovery Iowa, I'm the child and family team lead. But if you have a need in another area, we have divided, because this was such a big project to take on statewide, and we're used to, you know, as a team lead, taking on a few counties that have been impacted by a disaster. What Karen Hyatt decided to do was divide us up into addressing certain issues. So we've got somebody that focuses on domestic violence, somebody that focuses on developmental disabilities, and reaching those folks, making sure their needs are met. Workforce, older adults, ag team. Again, I'm the child and family, and then we have Megan, who focuses on veterans. So if you happen to have a need in one of those areas, or have a question, or want some information from us, you can email one of those folks directly. And then we created a QR code. My goodness, I mean, learning curve through this pandemic disaster, huge for me. All right, I never used a QR code before, but now we're using it all the time. So we have all learned a lot through all of this. But so that's an active QR code that will take you to our website. So again, whole state. We're covering the whole state with this emotional support. And we're doing a little bit in person, but most of it's over Zoom. Some teams work too, but we right now are doing a little bit of work with camp counselors in person, which has been super cool, but it's hard to get to all these little counties all across the state. But we had somebody up in O'Brien, and we have somebody that went down to Washington, and somebody doing some services today in Boone. So we can get it done if in person is the only option. And our camp counselors, they're going to be in person with campers, and a lot of their trainings are happening outside. So that's how that came to be, but it's been a great experience. We have been helping these camp counselors, 16 to 24-year-olds, kind of process this past year so that they can best be available emotionally and for support for their campers throughout the summer. So it's been a very cool experience, especially because of that age group. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the data on that particular age group in a minute. So so the state applies for this FEMA grant and then finds different agencies across the state that are willing to implement the service. So again, it's that counseling, crisis counseling support. We do educational opportunities kind of like this, and then connect people to existing referrals and resources when needed. Things like rental assistance, or, sometimes people call us or submit a request for assistance on our website, and they aren't even sure, what they need. It's hard to define when you've never reached out for emotional mental health support. Sometimes it's hard to define what you need. You just know that things are not going well. And so we're a great resource for that. Call us if things are just not going well. We'll help you figure it out. So some of the agencies that have been reached out to provide this service, I'm with that bottom one, Pathways Behavioral Services, but University of Iowa runs our team that's connecting with people who have disabilities, and the ISU runs the hotline, the 1-800-447-1985 number. And then the Abbey Center out of Cedar Rapids there has been running our warm line, just kind of another hotline option. The Iowa State one is available 24/7, and the Abbey Center line is 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. And we get the question a lot of why we have two numbers, and really it's just a matter of these places, all of these places, were able to hire additional staff to meet the need. So the same with the Abbey Center and ISU. And so their phone numbers, their assistance will exist after the disaster, after the pandemic is done. It's just they were able to hire more staff for the increased volume, for the increased need. I gotta move my little bar down here if I can figure out, it's kind of in my way. So pre-COVID, 11% of US adults reported symptoms of anxiety and depression. And I would say that's 10% or less is it's a pretty average number for the percentage of people that have a diagnosed mental illness. But then in just May, this is just last month, so CDC is pretty fantastic about keeping us updated on data. And you can go directly to that data yourself with that link below, but because that's where I got this. But in May, this is just this last month, 43 to 48% of adults ages 18 to 29 were still reporting symptoms of anxiety or depression. So that's too high. We need to get that down, and that's why this grant is still in existence. But you can look at all the different age groups and how they've been impacted and what they're reporting as far as depression and anxiety. They also split it out, anxiety versus depression too. Are there any questions at that point? Please interrupt if there is. I'd be happy for. Here's another look at that. Here's another look at that data. So this one is just an overall look at households, not separated out by any kind of age group. But you can see it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. Again, as a whole, as households in general has been polled, we're still looking at close to 30% reporting that anxiety and depression. And then if you look at the below, graph, you'll see again that 18 to 29-year-old, and that's one of the reasons we've reached out to camp counselors, is because that is who those folks tend to be, is that age group. And so we'd be happy to provide assistance in any way to that age group to help get that anxiety and depression down. And then the other thing to note is that women tend to report more depression and anxiety, you see in that bottom graph. So this slide is really about, has everybody heard about trauma-informed care? To me, that's kind of what this slide speaks to. It's all about, so we're all dealing with the pandemic. We've all been impacted by the pandemic. Some of us have been impacted by the derecho and the pandemic. And if I remember right, Paul's community was recently impacted by a tornado. So this slide talks about, you know, your community, your family, your school, the people in your bubble may be dealing with the pandemic differently than another community. And these are some of the reasons why. So maybe your whole community had hands-on having to help with a tornado recently, or all hands-on having to help with that derecho. Or maybe your community didn't, but healing and going through that process after a disaster, it takes a while. And so some people weren't ready to deal with another disaster like the pandemic. And then throw in there too, a loss of a family member. It doesn't necessarily need to be from the pandemic, but you know, we lose our loved ones, you know, at times, and whether there's a disaster or not. And so if you recently, last year, even before the pandemic, recently lost somebody in your life, that's going to impact how you deal with the pandemic or a tornado or a flood. Maybe your family was already struggling financially. If you can't pay rent, certainly that's going to impact how you deal with a disaster. Maybe the pandemic came and now you lost your job because of the pandemic. You know, it's just everybody's at a different place, and we need to be cognizant of that. Cultural differences too. Think about some cultures don't receive certain medical care, and some do, so we have to keep that in mind. Pre-existing conditions, mental health. So transitioning to Zoom was an excellent option for many, but not the option for everyone. Some people couldn't get on Zoom. Some people had such severe mental health illnesses that it was not a good option for them. I'm a children's mental health counselor, and trying to do a Zoom session with a kid with pretty severe ADHD or severe on the autism spectrum, that's a challenge. So it was a fantastic opportunity, but not fantastic for everyone. So keep all those things in mind. Here's just what our website looks like. Again, like I talked about, there's the Abby Center number, that's the Iowa Warn line, there's the ISU Iowa Concern Hotline, and those numbers will exist long after this grant does, and I just think that's important to remember. It's a good system in place to help people when there's that increased need. And then it transitions out nicely too, because there's still lots of support that's available. So I don't know, I see the orange thing flash every once in a while. I don't know if that means somebody has a question, but when I see it flash, I'll ask. Let me know if there's any questions or comments.
So far, there are not any questions in the chat box.
Okay. So we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, all these things that my 43-year-old brain had to learn and really well was a challenge, but I feel pretty good about it. Great opportunity for me to learn the ins and outs of all these things. I'll go through some of them in more detail here. So specifically for teens, I run a preteen. I run the preteen support group on Wednesdays from 4 to 5. Now we're just transitioning for the first week this week, where all the kids in that group are now on summer break. So we are going to change that to fit everybody's needs a little bit better. But we've been running the whole year on Wednesdays from 4 to 5, a Zoom support group for preteens all over the state of Iowa, and super cool experience to bring teens from different, communities, talking about their school experiences, what's been the same, what's been different. And they're so interested. What time does your school day start? When do you end? And all that stuff. So it's been a great support network for a lot of preteens. And then the teen support groups is on Mondays. Still doing that over Zoom. And same thing, although I don't run that group, but I have filled in a couple times here and there. So I feel like that's been a great opportunity for teens. And then the Nominated Teen Forum is that teen advocacy group I was telling you about. And then we had a 99 Signs of Support teen party where we had Herky the Hawkeye joined us on that and showed his sign of support, and everybody made a sign and showed their sign, and we just talked about what has helped them get through this past year and what would they say to somebody who might still need support during all of this. And it's just, I just want you to be aware of all of this because of even the next, just keep it in mind for the next disaster. Like there is so much potential that we can do, and each time we learn more and ways to implement it. So keep it in mind when you're working in your communities of what might be available to them. The Core Defenders was a coloring book we got a hold of through the Children's Hospital, and we dispersed near 7,000 of those little activity books all across the state, some in Spanish too. And then we have an art and poetry. So on YouTube, we have been adding a couple books every week to a YouTube channel, and then we put an activity to go with each of those books. So if you go into our YouTube channel and then click on Show More we have over 80 books on there now, and you click on Show More, there's an activity to go with each of these books. And the idea behind that was we were working with a lot of counselors, and guess what? When we all had to shift to Zoom, we were a little tired. Our creative juices were not flowing quite as well as maybe they were, because it was a huge adjustment for us and for a lot of people. And so we thought part of the thing that we get to do with this grant is focus a lot of our time on how to help the counselors. And so we came up with these activities to go with all these books that really focus on addressing mental health needs in a variety of ways. Some are lighthearted, some address grief and loss, but a huge variety of books, some that are very popular and a lot of people have heard of too. So then because of those activities that we were putting with the books, then we thought it would be, a lot of them are art related or creation related. So we thought it would be cool to have a virtual art gallery too, so kids could show off their creations. So that's what that art and poetry, which is also a QR code that will take you to that art gallery. Any questions about all that? So Facebook has been one of our main ways of connecting with parents. And the average age for everybody involved in all of our Facebook stuff anyway is 35-year-olds and tends to be more women than men. So with that in mind, we've provided a lot of outreach through Facebook. It started with this Tell Me a Story group. And our thought with that was, as you're probably all very well aware of, for children, a huge benefit after a disaster is to get them back into some kind of routine. And some sense of what life was like before is going to be incredibly helpful for a child to help them cope. So the Tell Me a Story was, when we were all on lockdown is when we started that, was a story that we would read to the children at 10 a.m. every day, just to give them something to look forward to give parents some structure at a time when there was really no structure. And we've continued on with that. We've had some celebrity readers to keep it interesting. And then every time, of course, we let people know that we're here and we're available for that emotional support. And then the Parenting in the Pandemic group, I'm going to go into that a little bit more in detail, but that has been a way for us to provide resources and provide individual support to parents. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But we also have a Spanish group. I already mentioned the teen, preteen, teen advocacy groups. We have a group on Facebook for grandparents to provide that emotional support and get resources in their hands, including things like, we're sharing things like where they can go to get vaccinated, financial support and resources, rental assistance, food support. And then workforce resources. So that group is intended for anybody in the helping profession, really. Teachers, childcare providers, there's support and resources provided through that Facebook group. This was the 30-day fitness challenge and the fun DIYs were related to the ideas that the teen advocacy group gave us. And so those are on Instagram. So here's this parenting in a pandemic group that I just wanted, because I'm focusing on children and teens today, I just wanted to go through this whole last month. Every week we connect with somebody live for 15 minutes. We have a 15-minute discussion with somebody live where people can ask questions in that moment or after the fact, but with different resources all across the state, and a way to check in with them on how the pandemic has impacted them and their services and what they're seeing. So the very most recent one I just did was with somebody from Campfire. Owen was his name, and he's the director of Campfire out of the Boone area, but it covers a lot of different areas. And so some of the things they were seeing is that they're seeing record number of participants. They're having trouble getting enough staff to fulfill the positions, and I'm sure there's a variety of reasons for that. He talked about their protocol and how they came up with their protocol. And just as a way, I thought as a parent, it was reassuring to hear all that they do to prepare and to make sure they're following the latest and greatest guidelines, but without making too many changes that it's stressful to parents in that way too. They're not going to change at every move the CDC makes, because at some point parents just want to know what to expect when they're sending their kids. So you can go back in the newsfeed and listen to what Owen has to say about Campfire. And then the one before that. And the reason we focused on teens this whole last month is because we took a poll in that there's like 600 parents in that parenting in a pandemic group. And we asked them, what do you want to hear about? We've been telling you all this stuff, but we aren't sure if this is what you want to be hearing. So they said they were more interested in what have teens got to offer, or what do we have to offer teens, and how do we provide them support, and what's going on with teens. So that's how we went down this path. So we also talked with an Eating Disorder Coalition of Iowa. I'm a mental health counselor for children, and I didn't know there was an Eating Disorder Coalition. Fantastic resource. They have so much good stuff to offer. So they were talking about the increase in people reaching out for assistance for teens for sure, but also as young as 5. And I think she said as old as 80 or somewhere in the upper 70s. So they provide support to and connect people to good resources through that coalition. Connect to Careers was another one. They said youth have dropped off in participating in skill building activities such as internships throughout the pandemic. Their advice was reach out again. Maybe you dropped off, maybe you feel like you didn't drop off for a good reason and you want to get back in. They want you to be the best employee possible. And that's what they're there for, is to train teens to be good employees. And they have paid internship opportunities too. So I thought that was pretty cool. The Boys and Girls Club of Central Iowa, they were talking all about all the shifts that they had to make in this whole last year. Pre-pandemic, they were serving 800 kids, and then they went down to 350. Safety protocols, staff ratios, family changes. They were just talking about how families are having a hard time finding a new rhythm in all of this. Am I going to stay at home? Am I going to go back to work? And, what's next? So they talked about kids feeling isolated, lack of motivation to do their schoolwork, stressors of learning virtually. They just talked about how you got to be a certain age and at a certain level in your education to even be able to connect virtually to your school. So they were able to provide support to kids in that way. They talked about weight gain amongst teens and regressions in motor skills, such as just even being able to hold a pencil. All these things are a result of the pandemic. The Ames High student and family advocate, she saw a huge increase in depression, suicidal ideation, emergency room visits, residential placement, in part due to the isolation, she thought, depression that the teens were feeling. She said there was an increased need of emotional support for students who had lost their sense of purpose. So in my mind, the first phone calls that were coming through to us were a lot of that food insecurity, need for rental assistance, that financial impact of the pandemic, what she was speaking to in the Ames area was the kids who are usually the go-getters, achieving lots of great things, and how their sense of purpose was taken away, and they were the ones that were really struggling. And we are slowly bringing a lot of that back. But if you were planning on your prom, if you were in charge of planning your prom last year, you don't get a redo. So they're going to be forever impacted by that. And graduations, of course, look different. Even this year, graduations, proms, end of the year track seasons, football seasons, all looked a little different, maybe different than what you envisioned when you were, say, a freshman in high school and you had this vision, this plan of how your life was going to go over your high school career. So great impact in that way. United Action for Youth, they transitioned a lot of their services to Zoom. They got referrals from the schools to get hotspots to get kids connected for online schooling. I thought that was an interesting referral system that they had in place. They were worried about the major increase in screen time and a battle to decrease that as we re-enter to face-to-face. And then the anxiety, she talked about the anxiety about going back into to being in person. We're good at communicating and social interactions because we practice those. You don't just automatically be a good friend or have a good conversation. These things take practice. And so we're going to have to slowly re-enter all of that, was her thought. And then the other thing that I was not aware of or hadn't considered, but was just the importance of validating feelings, but also the inappropriate sexual interactions that were occurring on devices, just because the kids were on them so much, and damage done there. And, she was really worried about the results of those. So then AMP too, again, services for kids who have experienced any type of out-of-home placement, they moved to virtual. They saw a decrease in interactions too, and a dropout of services too. And that's a great support network for kids that have experienced any kind of out-of-home placement. And so she was really encouraging kids to get back in that program.
Hi, I'm Lexi. During quarantine, there have been many positives, and I really think that a couple positives is that it gave us teens to figure out who we are and how to mentally and physically work on ourselves. But there have also been negative side effects to this. We've lost a lot of physical connection with people, and it's making us have more screen time. And I really think that this is going to make it hard for teens to have face-to-face connections. Hi, I'm Lex.
So a pretty insightful teen just spoke to all that we summarize in a month's worth of parenting in a pandemic lives. She's one of our teen advocates. She spoke to the anxiety of going back in person. She spoke to a positive, a lot of self-reflection going on, a lot of opportunity for self-reflection that maybe the teens wouldn't have had before. So Lexi pointing out a positive, that's nice. So her little clip is part of a longer 10-minute video that Miss Iowa, Emily Tinsman is into, that the teen advocates helped pull together. And then we sent that out to all the high school guidance counselors across the state so they could share them and use them as they felt was appropriate. So here's some more negatives, more things to be concerned about, unfortunately. But of course, putting the lack of physical activity, even thinking about yourself, when you're at the office, when you're at the school and you get to walk from classroom to classroom or to your locker and back or to the bathroom and back, you might not think that's much of a big deal, but that adds up over time and speaks to what Talia from the Iowa City area was talking about in that weight gain, those concerns. It's just a whole year. Some kids did a whole year of virtual, and even if you build in those PE times and that physical activity, it's hard to replace that that walking down the halls and all, and in and out of the school building. I do know some people came up with some unique ideas, so you can keep this in mind if we ever need to do this again. And some kids will stay virtual come fall, because not all kids are vaccinated and they have family concerns. So keep that in mind. But they would do like math upstairs and then have science in the kitchen, and so you can build in some movement. So screen time, especially at night, can make a person feel less sleepy. Disrupted school schedule, so one day school and the next day none, and that can make it hard to wake up because of those inconsistencies. And then if you have an inconsistent sleep schedule, you can crave unhealthy foods. And again, back to that weight gain. And then sleep impacts not only teen driving, but everybody's driving. And then slowly shifting back to the pre-pandemic opportunities is certainly good, but a whole year of those negative impacts don't just go away overnight. You might be aware of this one, but there was a decrease in reports of child abuse over this whole past year, but not necessarily or not likely a decrease in child abuse. And that's because teachers are one of actually the main reporters of child abuse. And they were, when everybody was virtual, we're just not seeing those kids in person. So like right now, I think this is a funny thing. So we were all given t-shirts for COVID Recovery Iowa. Can you see my t-shirt? No, nobody's been able to see my t-shirt all year, but I wear it faithfully, right? But you get this tiny little window of somebody's life and face. And sure, you're invited into my home today, but you don't get to see much of that either, So it's just been quite the year and quite an experience. It's been stressful, of course, on parents that had to convert to that online, help their kids with that online schooling, or childcare providers, or people like not Big Brothers, Big Sisters, but Boys and Girls Club, that shifted to providing a lot of support. Campfire, actually, who we talked to, was providing a lot of support to people that were doing that virtual learning. Grandparents were recruited, so coming out of retirement to help their grandkids with online learning. And then I asked Kim Miller, who is in a Facebook Live, about, she's in the teaching department at UNI. I asked her about how she thought that the education system was impacted by the pandemic, and she said she focuses on the importance of reading, read, but she just felt like the gap that already existed in our learning system has widened because of the pandemic. So those who were struggling before are struggling even more now. That was her feedback. So she trains teachers. That's her job.
Thank you, Mandy. I do, for the sake of time, want to ensure that we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. If there are just a few more highlights you can give us, we will share our materials at the end of the conference. And if there are any additional pieces, we can pop them in the chat box as well.
You bet. I don't even know what time it is, but thank you. I guess I only have 2 slides left. So decision fatigue is another one to point out. Parents just having to make all these decisions for the first time on an ongoing basis, and sometimes just feeling like you can't make one more decision. And then kids not getting their regular checkups, impacting their health in the long run. And STIs, so sexually transmitted diseases like gonorrhea and chlamydia. So you thought of contact tracing as important for COVID. Well, it's also important for sexually transmitted diseases. And that was not happening because COVID testing took a priority. And so other testing got put on the back burner. And that is just our generic flyer. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to Paul.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. I'm going to put up my screen here. There we go. All right. My name is Paul Daniel from Center Associates in Marshalltown, Iowa. Have been here about 30 years and providing services in our community. We're a community mental health center that treats 2 counties, Tama and Marshall, as well as surrounding communities, Story, Hardin, and Power Chic, So we kind of have our hands in various other counties providing mental health services. Just to start with this whole topic and what Mandy has covered, extensively is so poisey personnel are, on the website today. Just hearing the stories of how we survived a significant tornado that ripped through the north part of town, and we are still recovering in some sense, physical buildings, but lives are continuing to be shaped and formed even through the trauma that we experienced. And then we had the derecho that came in, and basically not just Marshalltown, across Iowa, all over, and that probably took out so much of trees and physical buildings, and that caused a lot of stress for our community, entire community, not just one section of the community, but our whole county was impacted, along with several other counties all across the state. And then you have COVID that came in. And so when I look at, they say everything comes in threes, right? And so for Marshalltown, we've been hit hard, but we are strong. We are Marshalltown strong. We are Marshall County strong. And to be able to be a part of a community that comes together during crisis and during other times as well, to be collaborative, to be supportive to one another is our goal, and we have fulfilled that. So in talking about mental health, I'm going to go through these slides real quick, but I just want you to hear my heart. And you have all the data. You can read all the notes later, but thank you for whoever you are, whatever you're in, whatever field you're in, helping kids. Kids are so precious and kids are so vulnerable. But the most important thing is that kids are resilient. And even though they go through traumas in life, they're able to, it might take some time, but with the right resources and right support of family and helping the community come together, kids are going to be strong enough to manage and get through. And so I just want to kind of go through some of these things as I look at our presentation today and what Mandy has shared, and even those teenagers who were talking. Trauma, let's redefine trauma. Trauma is something that is kind of out there, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we kind of took the word trauma and we specialized it to say, wow, people that have served in our country in the armed forces, when they come back, they've experienced so much trauma, and we gave a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress. But trauma, the word trauma, is basically an emotional response that happens. Your life is going pretty normal. Your life is functioning with ups and downs. But when there's a trauma, it spikes up or spikes down, depending on how things are. If you go to a wedding for the bride of the wedding or the groom of the wedding, it could be it's a wonderful experience, but getting plans put together, getting all the details put together could be traumatic. A death could be traumatic. Just in Marshalltown over the last few weeks, we've had so many different car accidents and deaths. Those are traumatic events. But here's the other thing. I'm a heart patient, and when I go get my blood test taken, waiting for those results to come back in 2 to 3 days, I'm like, is my cholesterol high? Is my blood pressure going to be okay? Are my is my liver enzymes okay? Waiting for that test could be traumatic. Waiting for the COVID results. I had COVID, and I was like, can you do it fast? Well, I was one of the first responders here for health people to get it. And they said, well, it'll be about 24 to 48 hours. I'm like, no, I want it faster. I want to know if I have it or not. And so even that was stressful and traumatic. So wherever you're at in trauma, we're all going to experience trauma. And kids experience trauma. And sometimes kids go as parents go. kids move forward, as parents move forward, kids can also go backwards because of what they're around or who they're around. So part of our trauma experiences come out of this emotional response that we might have, which can be sometimes positive, which can be sometimes negative, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So as far as in Marshalltown, after the tornado went through, people, I still wake up, and when I hear the siren going off, this is 3 years later almost, I'm like, oh, what's happening? When I look at the cloud, I mean, obviously last few days have been great here in Marshalltown, hot, but bright. But when it's dark and cloudy, I'm looking around and going, is there a tornado coming in? I'm still triggered by that. So some of those are just some of that flashback. The tornado went over the building that I'm looking out a window right now. That tornado was right outside my window, and I felt the thing going over our building, shaking it. You know, and so anytime, you know, they say a tornado sounds like a train, they are absolutely right. It sounded like a train coming through. And so I still live with siren sounds that, oh, what does that mean? You know, and people can experience different levels of symptoms when it comes to how they experience the physiological compared to the emotional and the mental health aspect of it. But trauma, having those types of symptoms is always normal when we experience trauma, but how we deal with it is what we're going to talk a little bit about. Let me show you some pictures of what kids have. This was a group that we did, and thank you, Mandy, for sharing that art therapy aspect of it, art and pottery and all these different things. Kids might not be able to inform through their voice what they're going through. They might not be able to articulate and put words into what it means for them to go through something. And so we had kids draw pictures. If you look at this picture, this is a child drawing a picture of how they felt when the tornado, when their parents said, go to the basement. Look at what the child has drawn. I mean, it's just chaos. It's just chaos. The child is just experiencing so much. They don't know how to put it in words. And somebody made a note here earlier saying, man, the anxiety and the depression has increased, or those numbers are startling. Absolutely it's startling, because when kids are going through unsecured times, when they're going through things that seem a little off target, that emotional response leads to what Mandy earlier called worry, or it could lead to what we call in psychology anxiety-related symptoms. And what anxiety can do can cause a lot of further damage if it's not well managed. So if you look at this picture here, here's a child that is talking about all their trauma. And if you can see that I just put these letters in there, TRUMA, you know, and that trauma for that child could be in so many different ways. It could be because they're scared. They had to go into the basement. Their roof got taken off, or a tree went through their house. And so we had kids just keep drawing pictures. And here's a child. I will scared when the storm kills someone. Now, thankfully, through derecho and through the tornado, we did not have any deaths. And so we were grateful about that, but that wasn't true of all of the communities. But here's a child drawing a picture of a tornado and causing or showing a picture of fearful, because what happens if someone dies? Here's another one that the child is talking about. All they heard was a boom and thunder, and the rain came down, and she's crying out for, Dad, where are you? He was outside. Getting the truck and some of his construction. Where are you when the storm is right there? Here's another one when the storm was going through. I was like a scaredy cat. I was a scared cat. Here's another one. They're talking about draw a picture of your house, and she's talking about all the different places and the different rooms where people are at. And here's we did a lot of group and processing and having kids draw pictures out just to talk about the emotions. And it was interesting to see during this time. So really shows what they felt: sadness, social isolation. Are we good? Okay. So social isolation and kept that social isolation. One of the things we have in the mental health field in the last 4 of those, if you take all 4 of those, you kind of look at it and you say, well, here are some things that have happened. I'm anxious and depressed. So I am fighting at home or arguing, and I have lost a job, or I'm struggling with finances. So I'm going to self-medicate. These are parents. And then when they self-medicate, they're absent from their kids. There might be domestic dispute. Just life. And then you put the kids in, they're talking about cabin fever. They were stuck in the home and they were unable to move around. Even wear the mask, don't wear the mask, wear this, get your shot, don't get your shot. Who has your shot? Who doesn't? I know I went into Walmart several times during the first few months. I'm like, do they have COVID? Oh, they're coughing. I almost wanted to get a shirt that last summer that's said, I don't have COVID, I just have anxiety. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure if you can hear me very well. Your sound's been cutting out quite a bit recently. If you want to double check your connection a little bit, we do want to capture as much of your insight as possible.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you right now, so yep, okay. You can go ahead and proceed.
I'll try to
we'll hopefully catch everything.
Yeah, I'll try to hold on to this. So as part of the risk factors, one of the increasing symptoms we've noticed in kids, we might not call it depression, but there's a sadness. It's not so diagnosable, but it's more situational. Has surfaced over the last few months for us when we see it. Part of how we can help and what we have done here in Marshalltown is working outside of Marshalltown. But while the kids are here, families are here, we want to provide we've been able to connect them and go into all counselors and the social workers in the school and come alongside of them as a multidisciplinary.
Hey, Paul, I'm sorry, we're still continuing to miss most of your sound. It's cutting out pretty badly at this point in time. I'm not sure that we're catching most of the presentation.
Struggling, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're catching most of the sentences in there, but what we can do is we will share the the slides, if you want to pop some information into the chat box and share it that way, we can definitely grab some of your feedback or ideas that way. Or we can always do a re-recording later and send it out as well. It's unfortunate. I think it's the connection, but you can give it another shot, or we can open up for questions. Either way you'd like to do it, Paul will let you make that decision. All right, so I think maybe what we'll do at this point, oh, I'm sorry, Paul, we're just not catching you. Maybe if you're able to switch over to the phone, call in by phone, we can do some Q&A at this point. Okay, great, I see you're in there. So at this point, we're gonna switch over to some questions from the audience for our last couple minutes. If you'd like to pop them in the chat box or come off mute, we'd welcome any questions that you have for both Paul and Mandy. And if you have additional questions past what we can cover today, we're happy to make those connections offline and help connect you so you can get your answers. So please, please don't be shy. Share with us what questions you may have. And if there aren't any questions, maybe I'll just say, Mandy, if there's anything you want to say in closing, otherwise we can conclude. Oh, I do see a question actually, excuse me, just popped in. The question is, did you see a distinction in the supper required by kids who may have support required by kids who may have already had severe or persistent MI and those who had more situational experiences?
A difference in the kids that had pre-existing mental health conditions versus kids who the pandemic's more situational. Is that right? I would just say that certainly the kids who already had mental health issues, they didn't go away. And then sometimes they felt like they were kind of at bay, especially when the kids were doing online schooling and really had those behavior issues or difficulty interacting with their peers. And so that was, you know, kind of went away temporarily. And so it may have felt like less of a need at that time. But as we transition back, we not only have had referrals from those kids and those families, from teachers and families and the other people in their support network, but then new referrals for kids who are really just not dealing with the anxiety from the past year would be a common referral, is for all ages. I just had a referral for an 8-year-old, but on up to through those teens, anxiety is a common reason for the referrals for kids who did not have anxiety before, or were not seeing us for anxiety before. I see the question there. How long does it take for kids to recover from trauma? I wish Paul were on here. He would be a good one to answer that. But they're on their own timeline. There is no, I couldn't even predict. And for one, all of those reasons, as far as their community and resilience and family resources that are available. And there's just so many things involved in that recovery process that you just can't predict. But I think the main thing to do is give them that opportunity to talk about it, help them develop those communication skills so that they can talk about it. I think it doesn't have to be so purposeful, just be a good listener. And sometimes kids will bounce right back and come back with fantastic coping skills for whatever life throws at them next. But no set timeline for sure.
Thanks for answering that, Mandy. We do have Paul back. Paul, if you're able to speak to that question. All right. Well, Unfortunately, our sound just hasn't been very cooperative for Paul at
Yeah,
the
can you-
moment, but
can you hear
I
me?
would like, oh, yep, we can hear you. Go ahead, Paul.
Lori,
Yeah. Unfortunately, Paul, it's still just
okay, so I'll
continuing
try it here.
to,
Answered it well. I wait.
it is
If anything-
continuing to cut out. So I think it being 1:58, I think it's a good time for us to say thank you to our presenters, to Mandy and Paul, and just encourage that we can continue this conversation past today. Today was an opportunity to bring this to the forefront, to take a look at where things are at right now. And we will share the materials from today as well as the video link, and can absolutely get contact information out from Paul and Mandy if anyone would like to connect further. So thank you everyone for joining us for this session. Please continue, stay with us for our next session. It will be the same Zoom link in 30 minutes at 2:30. We will be having leveraging volunteers during disasters. And as a reminder, if you stay logged into the session, we will move you into the waiting room during that in-between time. Also, one last piece for you, we do have a survey. We would love your feedback for this session. All responses are anonymous, just an opportunity for us to improve our conference. So thank you everyone, and thank you so much, Mandy and Paul.